Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into something pretty intense today, something you guys sent our way. It's this idea of the corruption of the mind.
Ooh, yeah, I've heard about this.
Right. It sounds kind of ominous, doesn't it?
It does.
But hold on, before you think we're, like, going full-on dark side here.
Yeah.
It's not about labeling anyone as, like, evil or anything.
Right.
It's more about understanding these almost like sneaky little shifts in our thinking.
Subtle changes.
Exactly. You sent us this excerpt from The Erosion of Moral Compass, and it's got us thinking.
It's a good one.
It is. So we're going to break it down, see what makes this whole corruption of the mind thing so relevant today.
And I think what's really interesting is how this source uses this metaphor of a tapestry, to describe our moral compass.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's like all these different values and beliefs and experiences all woven together.
Okay.
Each thread represents something, important.
Right.
And when those threads start to fray, the whole thing weakens.
That's really powerful image. So it's not so much about being like good or bad, but more about these tiny little erosions.
Yeah.
Compromises we make that can weaken that whole tapestry, that whole structure.
Exactly. And it's often so gradual.
It is.
We might not even realize it's happening until boom.
Exactly.
Something happens that just exposes everything.
It's like, whoa, where'd that come from?
All right, so then how do we spot those weak spots? The source talks about some warning signs. The first one that really stuck with me was this idea of a loss of empathy.
Which, we hear that term a lot, but what does that actually look like in our everyday life?
I think a good example is, you're walking down the street.
Yeah.
And you see someone who's clearly struggling.
Right.
Maybe they're experiencing homelessness or they look visibly upset, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of have that moment where, do you feel that pang of compassion, that desire to help?
Right.
Or do you just look away?
Yeah.
Maybe even feel a little annoyed. That shift, that disconnect, that's a sign.
That's a powerful example. It's so easy to get caught up in your own bubble and forget that everyone's fighting their own battles, right?
Exactly. And that lack of empathy, it can make us justify our own bad behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we're less tuned in to how our actions affect other people.
Which takes us right to that next warning sign the source talks about, rationalizing unethical behavior.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we've all been there at some point.
Totally.
Like that little white lie to get out of something, or bending the rules when we think we can get away with it.
Oh, yeah. Our brains are amazing at justifying our actions, especially when it comes to, protecting ourselves.
Right.
We want to see ourselves as good people.
Of course.
So when we mess up, our minds are like, nope, no problem here. Let's minimize that harm, shift that blame.
So how do we catch ourselves in those moments? How do we become more aware of that self-deception?
It's all about self-awareness, really.
Okay.
Taking a pause before we react, asking ourselves, what's really driving this behavior right now?
Yeah.
Am I living by my own values?
It's tough to do that.
It is. It's much easier to just
go with the flow.
Yeah. Or avoid the discomfort.
Yeah.
But you got to ask, am I just protecting my ego here?
That's such a good point. So self-reflection is key. Being brutally honest with ourselves, even when it's hard. Which actually kind of relates to the next sign the source brings up. Being susceptible to manipulation. And nobody wants to admit they're easily manipulated, but aren't we all vulnerable to it to some degree?
Oh, absolutely. And it often comes down to, like you said, that lack of self-awareness.
Okay.
Or even a lack of confidence in our own judgment.
Interesting.
If we don't really know who we are, what we believe,
right,
it's easier for other people to influence us. Yeah. And we might not even realize it's happening.
Especially these days, right? It's like we're bombarded with information and opinions.
Constantly.
And everyone's trying to sell us something, convince us of something.
It's overwhelming. And that's where, as the source points out, critical thinking is so crucial.
Being able to sift through all the noise.
Exactly. Evaluating information, questioning everything, spotting those biases in ourselves and what we see online.
It's like we have to become these master detectives of our own minds.
Right. You can't just accept everything at face value. You got to dig deeper, ask the tough questions, be ready to be wrong.
Be willing to be wrong, yeah.
Because if we don't, we're wide open to misinformation, propaganda, all of it. And that can have some serious consequences for us and for everybody else.
And that lack of critical thinking, that is another one of those major signs the source talks about when it comes to a corrupted mind.
Big time. Especially now.
Yeah, with how fast information spreads online.
It's a wildfire. And without that critical thinking muscle, we just accept anything that fits with what we already believe.
Oh, totally. Even if it's wrong, even if it's totally false.
Exactly. We get stuck in those echo chambers.
Surrounded by people who think just like us.
Yep. It's comfy, but it's dangerous.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, but you need those different viewpoints.
You do, to challenge you, to help you grow.
Okay, so we've got loss of empathy, rationalizing bad behavior, being easily manipulated, and a lack of critical thinking. Those are some pretty heavy signs.
They are.
But there's one more that the source mentions that I find really interesting, maybe even the most concerning. A loss of integrity. What makes that one so significant?
Well, integrity is like the core, right?
Yeah.
It's about matching up what you say with what you do, even when nobody's looking.
It's about doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
Exactly. And when we start to let that slip, when we compromise our values, maybe for convenience or to get ahead, that can really damage us.
It erodes your self-respect, right? Makes it harder to trust yourself, trust others.
It impacts everything. Your relationships, your sense of self.
It's like this domino effect.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the signs of a corrupted mind, but what actually leads to that erosion in the first place? Like what cracks that foundation?
Right. What are the roots of it all? This source digs into some really interesting factors, and one that stands out is the power of our environment. It's huge, right?
Sure.
Think about it. If we're constantly surrounded by, like, negativity, unethical behavior, people who just seem to have lost their way,
Yeah.
it seeps in. It can influence us without us even realizing it.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. It's like that saying, right? You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if those 5 people aren't exactly, moral compasses themselves,
It makes you think.
it does. And it goes beyond that immediate circle, too.
Oh, yeah.
It's the media we consume.
Yeah.
The stuff we see online, the people we interact with there.
Right.
Even our workplaces,
Mhm.
all these places, they shape how we see what's acceptable.
It's true. It's not just who you hang out with in person, but all those influences, all those voices you let into your head. And speaking of influence, peer pressure, man, I think we've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's like high school stuff or even as adults.
Right.
So
Like that need to fit in, it doesn't just disappear.
it's powerful, even if it means like going against your gut, doing something you know isn't right, just because everyone else is. Have you ever found yourself doing that?
All the time. It's tough, right? That's why it's so important to know who you are, what you believe in, like have that strong foundation.
You need that inner compass, especially when the outside world is pulling you in all these directions, so you can stay on course. That makes a lot of sense.
It does, but it's important to remember that it's not always like this conscious choice, this erosion.
Right.
Sometimes it's way more subtle, like the experiences we have, the things that shape us, especially early on.
That makes sense. The source mentions how personal experiences, especially tough ones, traumatic ones, can really affect how we see things, the choices we make. Like, if you go through something truly awful,
It changes you.
it's easy to see how that could lead to someone becoming more cynical or distrustful or just having a darker view of the world. What are their thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, trauma.I leaves its mark. It shakes you up, makes you question things, right? Like what you can even trust, who you can trust, even your own place in the world.
Right.
It makes sense that in those moments, your moral compass might wobble a bit.
You're just trying to survive.
Exactly. You become more guarded, focused on protecting yourself, maybe less tuned in to the needs of others.
It's a natural response. But we can't let those experiences, however powerful, completely define us.
Right. We have to heal. We have to rebuild that trust in ourselves and in the world.
So even though our experiences, they shape who we are.
Absolutely.
They don't have to dictate our future.
We still have a choice.
We always have a choice. That's a good thing to remember as we keep going here. It's almost like we're shaped by so many different things.
It's true.
The people we're around, everything we see and hear, the experiences we've had, sometimes it feels kind of overwhelming,
They can.
Like, can we actually hold on to our own moral compass with all that going on? But I gotta say, what I really appreciate about this source is that it doesn't just leave us feeling hopeless. It actually gives us some ways to fight back against this whole erosion of the mind thing. It gives me hope,
Me too. And that's what I think is so great about these deep dives we do.
Right.
It's not just about identifying the problem, but about equipping ourselves to actually deal with it.
Exactly.
We're not just along for the ride.
Yeah.
We have a say in this.
So, what are some of the tools we can use? How do we actually strengthen our what did you call it? Our resilience against all these like eroding forces.
Well, the source starts off with something that sounds pretty simple. Cultivate strong moral values.
Okay.
But then it's like, how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
And I think it starts with taking a good hard look at ourselves. Like, what do we really believe in? What are our core principles, the things we're not willing to budge on?
It's about figuring out those non-negotiables. But then how do you actually put those values into action? I mean, it's one thing to have them, but another to actually live by them.
Right.
Especially when things get tough.
Oh, for sure. That's where those critical thinking skills we were talking about come in.
Right, right.
Being aware of all the sneaky ways we can be influenced, like without even realizing it, by our environment, by relationships, even just by stuff we read online. We have to be more picky, more aware of what might be pulling us off course.
So paying attention to those little red flags, those moments when something feels off, or you're tempted to like compromise what you believe in just because it's easier.
Exactly. It's about asking yourself, why am I drawn to this particular article or this person's opinion? What biases are at play here? Is this really what I stand for, or am I letting other people think for me?
It's like we have to become like protectors of our own minds.
We do. Constantly on guard against anything that might chip away at our integrity. But that's tough, right? I mean, we're constantly bombarded with information these days. How do you even begin to do that?
For real, are there any like practical exercises the source recommends to kind of cultivate that awareness?
There are, actually. One thing it emphasizes is seeking out different perspectives, especially those that challenge our own beliefs.
Ooh, that's hard.
It is. It's so easy to stay in our own little bubbles, surrounded by people who agree with everything we say.
It's comfy.
Right.
Yeah.
But it also makes us kind of blind to other viewpoints.
And more likely to be manipulated.
Exactly.
It's like they say, if you're always the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
100%.
Yeah.
We need those opposing views, those different experiences to challenge us, help us grow.
But that can be uncomfortable. It's way easier to stick with what you know, even if it means you never really change.
I know,
But sometimes that discomfort,
yeah,
that means you're actually growing.
I think so too.
It's like you're expanding your horizons, getting stronger.
Stronger, yeah.
Wow, this whole conversation has been a lot. In a good way.
It has.
We've covered so much. The signs of a corrupted mind, all the things that contribute to it, even some ways to protect ourselves.
A lot to unpack, but important stuff.
It really is. And it's empowering to know that we do have a choice in all of this. We can actually strengthen our own moral compass and move through the world with more intention, more awareness.
Absolutely. We have more power than we realize.
We do. And it's not like a one and done thing, right? It's an ongoing process.
100%. We've got to stay alert, stay curious, stay open to learning and growing.
Right.
And always, always making sure our actions line up with what we say we believe in.
Well said. And if you're listening to this and you're like, whoa, I need to know more, which I totally get.
I'll feel you.
Go check out the source material yourself, dive deeper into the erosion of moral compass, and even better, talk about it with someone, talk about these signs, these influences, everything we've been discussing. Because the more we have these conversations, the more aware we become.
Right.
And the more prepared we are to face all this complexity out there without, losing ourselves.
Without losing our way.
Exactly. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's been a good one.
It really has.
We've got more thought-provoking topics coming your way soon, so make sure you're following us for those. Until then, keep those minds sharp, everyone.
And those compasses steady.
See ya.